Good evening, Hibiscus. Welcome to the latest episode of Cosmic Jar. So, for this session, I really wanted to explore the purpose of suffering. Look, 2024 is a Saturn-ruled year. It deals with elements of humiliation. It deals with various levels of illusions being shattered in our lives. And I think most tough, it deals with us facing the consequences of our ideologies, our behavioral patterns, the things we enable. Even stuff like where we have been lazy and willingly indifferent and kind of purposely turning a blind eye to the other extreme of what are the consequences when we force things, we don't let things flow, we're too controlling. It's hard. And I can sense that you're all going through the same frustrations as I am, because I can see it in the questions that you send in for readings. I can see it in terms of the topics you would like to focus on when you have readings with me. And to be honest, there's this 1 week I had of readings that really sticks out to me, right? During this week, I met a plethora of people who had gone through stuff that I can never imagine holding it down, right? In this week, it began with the First Lady on a Monday. This was a woman who had grown up in Eastern Europe, did not have an easy childhood. Like, both parents, deeply neglectful, deeply cruel, right? That's the environment she blossoms in. Then she grows, she moves countries. She has a marriage with a deeply abusive partner, mentally, emotionally, physically, right? Even then, go a layer further. She ends up having to fight an aggressive cancer. There is not 1 decade this woman has known peace. But today, the most optimistic, the most bubbliest, the most adventurous person I've ever done a reading for. Then the next day came. I had a reading with this wonderfully creative, artistic, vivacious Muslim man, right? Deeply religious, very passionate about his faith, even a scholar. He was gay. And he was battling with, a lot of tension with his family and this idea that he didn't want to get married ever. And I was like, could you imagine being in that position where you are so in love with your faith, it fills you with joy, but then there's a part of your identity, for whatever reason, causes you, right? Then the day after that, I had this woman who came in and essentially, without airing anyone's dirty laundry, had made a series of horrible decisions and her life had imploded, right? And it was all very much self-inflicted, but it was only after it imploded she realized how bad it had got. And then the week went on and on. So I read for like 4 to 5 people every day. And, this week for me, I just remember being like, number 1, you should never complain about your own trials and tribulations because you never know what other people are going through. But it was also the perception, because majority of these people who'd gone through these really challenging circumstances where, some people simply would not survive. They do not have the resolve. Oh, the chirpiest, the strongest, the ones who fight back. And then, not to make light of anyone's pains, there were people who literally had failed talking stages and were acting like they were in their last, right? You would have thought their arm had been amputated and their lover had been thrown into the sea in front of them. And I was like, you're simply asking me questions about someone who does not care about you. I don't know what kind of answer you're seeking, but I promise, whatever comes out of my mouth, you are not going to enjoy it. This is not Starbucks spirituality. We're not here to babysit your feelings now. And then, when I look back all of that, I'm like, well, what is the purpose of suffering? Because even if we take away from the individual lens, we are currently and in never-ending historical times. And when you look at the world around us, when you think about the trials and tribulations communities are going through, people who are victims of genocide, people who are the victims of systemic like wealth inequalities, people who are intentionally marginalized, harmed, degraded, it becomes quite difficult to understand why we would have to bear this. But I have some answers. So, as always, grab a cup of tea, get comfortable. Let's talk about the purpose of suffering. So, for part one, I wanted to educate you all about what different religions say when it comes to the purpose of suffering. If any of you are new around here, I'm actually more than just a Vedic astrologer. My undergrad, I focused on religions, theology, and philosophy. And away from social media, I actually create different research and different reports that explore the implications of religion on politics and modern day societies across the world. See, I come through with more just the awooga wooga. As many of you know, I grew up in an interfaith household. And one thing I've always found really disheartening is the weaponizations of religions, how they're pitted against each other. And I hope as we go through these examples and what on the surface level looks like three very different religions, you see the same commonalities I do. So let's kick it off with Sikhism. So, when you begin learning about Sikhism, the first thing that becomes super apparent, suffering is an integral part of the human experience. And it's necessary because suffering aids spiritual growth. And it begins with a concept called hukum, God's will. Everything that unfolds in front of us happens exactly according to God's will. You know, for Sikhs, good and evil are not separate entities. Everything is one of the same. It's us that separates them. It's us that has this filing system that things like this are good and things like that is bad. That is not the nature of God, right? There's a phrase in India that they use a lot, and I think it helps kind of bring this concept into an easier way to understand. If things happen the way you would like, okay, cool. If things happen and they don't go the way you like, fantastic, perfect, because that means they're happening according to God's will. And the reason for that is, and I see this so much in readings, humans by default, we are super short-sighted. Even when I do a lot of readings, one thing that never fails to surprise me is how little people think of themselves and how they are so quick to ignore all the possibilities that could happen for them, right? Humans actually like to play it safe. I know there's so many like cuckoos out there that like preach self-development, entrepreneurship. This is not actually the nature of many humans. Many humans will like to stay in their comfort zone. You know, one thing that can take you out your comfort zone? Suffering, right? So alongside that, once we move past this concept of hukum, right? And really, when you talk about God's will, the one thing I have to emphasize is it doesn't matter if you like it or you don't. It doesn't matter if you understand or you don't why things are happening as they are. But what is absolutely vital is you engage what's happening in front of you. I think we can all agree, regardless of the levels of suffering that people go through, because again, you cannot compare pains. People will have their own version of suffering in this lifetime. It fundamentally will change your psyche, which leads me to the second element, spiritual growth. So when we begin exploring the connection between spiritual growth and suffering, for many Sikhs, suffering is a tool. It is a tool that enables spiritual growth. Look at it like this, right? When we go through our own experiences of that cruelty, of stuff that shakes us up, it allows for introspection. It gives us the opportunity, whether you do it or not, is a conversation around free will, right? But you will have moments in the toughest of times to reflect what has led you here. How are you accountable for the experiences you are having? Because it's not just the case, it occurs sporadically. There will be build-ups, there will be patterns of behaviors, there will be ignoring of things, right? Even if you flipped it, how do you know suffering isn't going to be the experience that allows you to understand how fundamentally strong, wise, intelligent, capable you are? A lot of the time when I think about, quite superficially, when people suffer in their careers, I think it's a very common experience. For many of us who worked in professional services or the corporate space, we end up in this weird psychological warfare of an office politics and kind of the cultural lay of the land in those parts of work, where we are forced to minimize ourselves and downplay ourselves, right? And somehow, some way, for me, it's like modern day colonization. You could actually take the dynamics of like the British colonial rule in India and you could apply it to corporate workspaces, and you would see the same interactions between like masters and slaves, all of that. But we suffer in those scenarios, do we not? We feel unhappy because we know we are not using our talents and skills to the highest extent we could be. We know we are enabling horrible people to do horrible things, and it builds up over time. And eventually, and I mean, this is a huge trend that we're seeing in terms of professional services across the world, you have enough, you quit, you burn out. And then often, and I hope to see more of this, to be honest, many people go their merry way and they end up doing their own thing. How many of you become successful? How many of you learn you are able to put food on your own tables? So that suffering, regardless of how intense, how horrible, how disheartening it feels in the moment, did it not lead you to learn your own strength? Did it not lead you to learn how to stand up for your value? Did it not show you who you want to be? You see the interconnections between suffering and spiritual growth. You know, one thing I've always found fascinating when it comes to stuff about spirituality, it's kind of like the weaponization of languages and concepts, because there's a big movement of like stoicism, right? Detachment. You should not be engaged. You should just forget about it all. The most spiritual people are the people who are engaged with society, right? They show up for people. They make sure, and not in an invasive or weird way, but there's a level of accountability that I am responsible for what people are feeling around me. And to whatever level God permits, I must ensure good things are happening. So suffering and spiritual growth start to have that dynamic in Sikhism. And you can easily start to understand when you look at your own experiences why things have to happen the way that they do. You would not evolve without suffering. If everything was delicious and sweet all the time, spiritually, you'd be so unhealthy because you wouldn't know how to cope. It wouldn't build any of your thinking skills. It wouldn't show you your resolve. I think this is a huge issue. You know, there's a lot of conversations online when it comes to parenting, right? And parenting is hard. It is not easy. It literally, the whole phrase of it takes a village to raise a child has never been more relevant. But one thing I think for me when I look at it is when you have kind of like a little bit of an epidemic when it comes to children who find the world difficult. And I don't believe in making children resilient to pain because I think that's unhealthy. But I do think we have to kind of acknowledge, well, what do we think we're giving them by wrapping them up or not showing them how to stand up for themselves or like constantly de-escalate things? Sometimes energy has to match energy and you'll make a child richer for that as they go into the world. So yeah, that's where we begin with Sikhi. So, following on from this, another key element when Sikhs explore the purpose of suffering is ego and attachment, right? So again, I think back to all the wonderful conversations I had with you all, right? And sometimes I think God does put me in a unique position, because I speak to on average, I think just over 50 people every week, right? That's a lot of different life experiences from all over the world. And sometimes it can be a little bit comical when you think about the conversations you've had in that day, because on one hand, you'll have someone who is going through what is the most emotionally cruel experiences, and then be like, I've just got to figure it out. What do you think? And then the other hand, I can only compare it to emotionally tripping up and getting a scab on your knee, and they'll be hysterical. And I'm like, But this is the thing. Something about the purpose of suffering helps temper people's ego attachments, because it is ego to end up in a space where you think you would be exempt from suffering, or you think you are above suffering, or it should, like, why do bad things happen to good people? All of that is nonsense. There's something about suffering that makes us realize at the deepest part of us that we are not exempt from anything. There's a line in Gurbani that basically, there's a Sikh hymns where it says, always be mindful because your ship is still at sea. Rags can go to riches and riches can go to rags. So I always think it's like a humble thing of like, don't feel overly attached to any circumstance or environment you have. Enjoy it in the moment, but everything will pass, right? And again, I think it does something healthy to the ego. The whole thing here is how you engage with it, right? So for the Sikhs, it's very important you do daily acts of savor, right? Service to other people, not even worship, but literally be of service. Because when you are of service to other people, it will always, I think, lighten your heart, because in those moments where you are serving people who 9 times out of 10 will be in much more tougher circumstances at you, it keeps you humble, it keeps you sharp, and it keeps you kind of grateful and gratitude, right? So just keep that in mind. There's something about the purpose of suffering which is actually healthy for you, and will make you realize, listen, for as long as we have attachments, I know people come from different religious backgrounds, but you know, Vedic astrologers tend to be highly religious because all our astrological knowledge comes from a religion, right? But for me, one thing I've always felt personally is the only thing that can truly free you of any pain or suffering is your faith in God. Because after a while, when you get to a point where you truly believe everything is God's will, we are always better for the experiences He puts us through. Slowly but surely over time, these things go from feeling like a car crash and you're like, oh my God, up against the water. This is just an inconvenient insect bite, and I know how to heal this one, so I'll be fine. The summer's come, it's just a season of insects, but winter will come as quickly and they'll be gone. Bada boom, bada boom. Now, alongside that, for many Sikhs, the purpose of suffering is to strengthen one's faith, right? So going back to the earlier concept of hukum, everything is God's will. When you get to a point where you understand God will only put you through situations that are for your betterment, fundamentally, you can handle whether you feel it in the moment or not. And again, even if you don't see it, everything is interconnected. Sometimes the pains we go through are not about us as an individual, but they could be moving and shifting other things around us. Sometimes life will put us in a position where our pains are not private. They can be very public. It can feel very humiliating. Just the way people say to you online that you should go for it, you never know who you're going to inspire, the same goes for your trials and tribulations too. You never know what you overcoming or what you enduring, even in the most humiliating, cruel, embarrassing circumstances, is changing around you. It's all interconnected. It all plays out. Hukum is God's will, right? And then alongside that, I think undoubtedly it gives us a level of acceptance and contentment, because the thing is, bad times will pass. They always do. Nothing is permanent. That's the whole point of reincarnation. You are in a state of Mayan illusions and temporary changes consistently all time, right? So over time, and this is a hopefully because you have free will, when times are not so intense, you would appreciate things that perhaps before you'd taken for granted, right? And likewise, whatever you receive, you always have a level of contentment. I think the difference between people who grow versus people who perhaps stay in a mindset that is really not of service to them is the level of acceptance is hugely different, right? When people are consistently in states of misery and moping and just what I find to be quite weak resolve, there's this whole idea that like, I deserve better. Why are things not happening for me? And the framing of the mind and the perception of the situation are completely off, right? And then they will stay in that perpetual cycle. Whereas people who are going through suffering, but somehow, some way are perceiving it differently, they will always look at it like this. However I got myself into this situation, I'm capable of getting myself out. Also, it's fine. Like, I will recover. And also, this situation has given me A, B, and C. And there tends to be, I would say, an inner dialogue of I don't think it's always they think they're destined to suffer, but I think there's an acceptance that if I would like to end up somewhere different or more beautiful or peaceful, the path there has to shape me in such a way that I can be content in that state. That's one thing people don't talk about enough. What happens if you have to get messed up a little bit so when your blessings come, your mind recognizes them? What happens if the things that we chase and want are actually for us and God has to put us through like a whole little process? So you know, the Sikhs really recognize that. It's a case of refinement, actually. Which leads me to my final point. When you look at the relationship that Sikhs have when it comes to suffering and the purpose of it, ultimately, once you get past spiritual growth, the purpose of spiritual growth is mukti, liberation. When we stay in these mindsets, we are naturally submitting to staying in cycles of misery, right? But when we strengthen our faith, we learn to think beyond ourselves. There is an agility we pick up, a grace, a contentment, a gratitude, a fight, a passion. Over time, the same things that used to like take us down for months, then weeks and whatever, slowly over time they affect us less and less and less and less. And it's not because our trials and tribulations are dwindling and we're experiencing them less frequently. It's the opposite. Their influence weakens, and it weakens because the mind has changed. So with that, I would like to introduce you to a few different snippets from Sikh Gurbanis that talk to the purpose of suffering. So let's look at two lines from the Guru Granth Sahib that address the concept of hukum, right? The first one is, one who has the Lord as their master, how can they suffer pain? This is talking back to everything that plays out as God's will. So when you understand it is God that is leading the way, that element of submission and understanding God only has your best intentions at heart can completely shift the perception of the experiences we are having. It goes from being, why me? How could you? To, of course, cool, you must trust me. I have this. What do you need me to fix? The second line is, one who sees pain and pleasure as one and the same finds peace. So think about what I said earlier, right? Our perception heavily dictates the things that we find to be positive or negative, but doesn't mean objectively that is the thing. Peace is temporary, pain is temporary. It's all Maya, it's all illusions. You are ever changing. The thing that needs to happen is the soul should become so grounded that regardless of what it faces, it never acts out of character, and it can meet every moment with an adequate response. You know, one thing I think people confuse dharmic faith with is this idea that we should just be like ever loving and just like kumbaya. No, the idea of I would say properly like reaching a place of spiritual enlightenment sounds so intense. I don't feel like people are reaching enlightenment in Kali Yuga, but what I think it is whatever your responsibilities end up becoming, and whatever moments and situation God decides you have to face off, you are able to execute the action necessary to handle those moments, and you are never held back by emotions or fear or perhaps even a mindset of like supremacy and entitlement that would cause you to somehow, some way lose out or not put your best foot forward in those situations. The next thing I wanted to talk about was suffering as a test of faith. So let's look at these two quotes. So the first one is, pain is the remedy and pleasure is the disease, because where there is pleasure, there is no desire for God. So think about what I said earlier, right? If we lived in complete states of bliss, we would feel no need to evolve. And in all honesty, I can speak from a personal lens. Like, I'm quite a religious person, even, I don't know if it comes across. I think religion's quite intimate personally, but for me, the reason I have such strong faith in God, number one, it would be because of you all. When you share your stories and I'm reading for you, and you know, obviously at this moment in time, we can tell, I can tell a freakish amount about you as a stranger. That's not me, that's God. Anything that you think is a wooga, it's not me, it's God. God has given me these abilities. God will take them whenever he sees fit, but it's not me, right? And when you see so many different layers, experiences, different morphings of pain and all of that, God is so real. Because I'll tell you one thing, there is not one person that has ever sat in front of me that hasn't come back later and been relieved. And I see it in my personal life. Like, I promise you, at one point I'll share a story about like the life I've lived, and sometimes I think my life is a testament. Like, the circumstances into which I was born, the opportunities I have been afforded, the way life is playing out, that could only ever be God. That truly could only ever be God. So I think there's definitely that side of suffering where you will learn God is real, and you know, whatever you do with those observations is completely your business. Now, the next line says, those who wish to enjoy constant peace should not be concerned with worldly suffering. So let's give me some context, right? It's just going back to that idea that, look, this is just the nature of human existence. To find true peace is to get to a stage where you understand this is just part of the parcel, and you don't wild out, you don't go into fits, you don't become jaded, you don't sink into the ground and let life like turn you into human mold. No, you stay in a state that is grounded, and you understand, you know, to exist in a beautiful garden is to understand you will weather many different kinds of seasons, but you will still grow, and there will constantly be cycles of death and rebirth, but at every point you will blossom into a beautiful flower. Suffering is the fertilizer. You will grow, right? And you could even grow back ample. Think of forest fires, right? Most forest fires are actually quite natural. The forest doesn't fret that, oh my god, it's over, this is my existence done. No, most forests, once they grow back post-fire, are even more abundant. Think about it, hibiscuses. Then let's look at these two quotes, right? Let's talk about suffering as a path to spiritual growth. So there's this really beautiful line that goes, "Oh Nanak, the whole world is suffering. Only those who rely on God's name are at peace." Are you seeing the themes? When you have a sense of there is something beyond me, you don't even have to personify it, but I think once you have that kind of thing of there is something more than us, it can alleviate you, because for whatever reason that thing is leading you in the direction that you are. And if you have faith in that thing, I think there's a certain level of courage and perhaps even contentment you can have regardless of the experiences that you go through. Then the second line is, "Embrace the name of the Lord in your heart, and the suffering, disease, and pain shall depart." Bars, but you get the point, right? You get the point. Next, let's look at lines when it comes to suffering and ego. I think these two lines have never been more relevant. "The entire world is in ego. The whole world is suffering." So this is the whole thing. And I think you can see it a lot in current political climate of how, people who are like, "I cannot believe this is happening to me," or da. I'll be honest with you, I find those people to be the most insufferable and the toughest to deal with. Because I just think, what did you think about your existence should be free of this? What is so mighty and wise and all good about you that you would not go through the same things that we do, right? So again, I think this is talking about kind of the bratty nature of human existence, and how when we get into that mindset, a lot of the defaults of human attributes are kind of designed in such a way that pain will naturally occur. That's the whole point in spiritual growth. You somehow, some way pick up the mindset, you adapt the tools. There's just something about you that metamorphosizes, so you don't give into those very normal default settings, and you can grow and evolve. The next line, "Ego is a terrible disease in the world. Those who attach themselves to the Guru's feet find peace." I think basically submission, right? When we, I was saying this very earlier in the podcast, that people who put their heads in the sand and avoid everything are exactly the same as people who will not let go of control in situations, and things have to happen the way they want. And if they don't have, same energy, different actions, but same energy. And it's only when you kind of, I think, become a little bit more flowing and understand that whatever is presented to us is a part of the parcel and we shouldn't resent it, you'll get where you need to be, But to attach yourself, think about it. When you attach yourself to people have to behave a certain way, when you attach yourself that your career must be this thing, when you attach yourself to, it's just all these things that are not designed in nature to support you, give you long-term security. Nothing. Our families are not guaranteed to give us that. Money is not guaranteed to give us that. Governments, there's nothing. I don't know. I think we assume that they should, and we should hope that they should, out of a social contract. But truly, for as long as humans exist, there is no 100% security and peace you can find in things that are designed to be ever-changing. And it would be very foolish to associate traits of stability and longevity in things that are not designed in such a way. And the last parts I want to finish off, these are some of my favourite lines from the Guru Granth Sahib. So they kind of cover the acceptance of suffering as divine will. So the first one is this: "Your actions seem so sweet to me. Nanak begs for the treasure of the name of the Lord." Whatever God puts in front of you is delicious. It will shape you and give you such treasures in the world that you couldn't find and no one else could give you on this planet. Do not question, hesitate, or even think lowly of the experiences you have. It all counts for something, but just acceptance will get you there a lot quicker. You know, one thing I was thinking of, so I love studying the Old Testament. I think it's so fascinating. And one of the things I often think about is when Moses and his people are wandering the desert. I think it's assumed it's meant to be a 2-week journey, and it ends up being, I think it's around 40 years, right? And you have some rabbis who have think pieces that go, well, this is a reflection of when they stop following God's will. So what should have been a notably shorter, sweeter, and easier journey turned into this whole debacle. And it's because they thought they knew better or they should be above certain things. And that always sticks with me, right? Then we have the last one. Hunger does not depart even if one possesses great wealth. How fitting for current times, right? If I could summarize that, it doesn't matter what you acquire in this life, suffering will always come. You know, we often talk about the rich don't suffer, right? They're so like, oh my god, like I'd rather cry in a Mercedes than on a pavement, which honestly, girl, same. Oh my god, same. But they're nonetheless, imagine how hyper paranoid you become when you are wealthy. What do you reckon your trust is of other people, right? Also, I often think about, what did you have to do to achieve that wealth? Do you feel safe and secure in any environments, right? And do you constantly feel the need to compete and perform? Do you become more self-conscious in ways that like other people would never ever think of? And then you have the other side of the spectrum, right? Poverty. That's like, oh god, because we also have to acknowledge like systemic induced like poverty, but nonetheless, right, you don't know where your next meal is going to come from. Unfortunately, because the world is so disgusting and a victim of colonization and capitalist mindsets, people who are in very dire circumstances go through so many humiliations for situations that to a certain extent are out of their control. So suffering doesn't go. It comes in all its shapes, forms, and sizes, but it serves a purpose, or it is what it is. So to sit there and have a fit over it and cry and waste months, if not years, of your life is the biggest disservice to yourself. Next, let's look at how Hindus view the purpose of suffering. So, when we look at the relationships that Hindus have when it comes to the purpose of suffering, it changes a lot compared to the Sikhs, right? So for the Sikhs, it's an integral part to make you strong, courageous, understand the faith and the will of God. For Hindus, it's kind of like a default factory setting when it comes to human existence. And it's very closely tied to 3 principles that you find in Hinduism, right? Which is karma, dharma, and samsara. So samsara is the cycle of death, rebirth, all of that jazz. So let's start with karma and suffering, right? So karma, literally, if you looked at the law of karma, it's this very detailed and intricate philosophy that everything is interconnected. So say for instance, let's take the example, you are like a mafioso don, right? And you amassed all this wealth and you were able to get away with slaughtering hundreds of people and you never really met justice. Doesn't mean your next life will be so sweet. You will at some point pay for them. And even then, one thing I've always found fascinating is when people are fixated that a person does not feel the full force of justice for doing terrible things, and then they think they go free. No one goes free. As someone who's been reading for over 15 years, it all trickles down. It will go to their loved ones. It can carry into society, but all these things are answered. So listen, The law of karma is fundamentally about your past actions, and everything will have a consequence. Now, when it plays out can change, but you will answer for that. So by default, a lot of the suffering we are going to go through may be predestined, and somewhere, some moment in time, we have took actions that we deserve to go through that. The next aspect of karma and suffering is the purification of the soul. So when it comes to karma, and I do this too, do not worry, right? So think about the phrase, don't worry, they'll get that karma, or I can't wait to face it, right? We kind of use it as a weaponization. The same way I explained to you, the ego is just a tool for the consciousness to understand it is individual, it has its free will. Karma itself is a tool, right? And it can be used as a tool of purification. So, often in this day and age, we're in a weird time, right? Where our norms are changing, things that we have often praised. We're like, oh my God, that's horrific. How could we ever? We're in that space, right? We're evolving. When we face our karmas, it's actually a great way to burn off negative karmic debt, right? It's a great way to purify our traits and habits. So say for instance, right? I'll give you a really good example. Growing up South Asian, we naturally are very colorist, but we don't understand to the extent that we're colorist. A lot of our songs have the term like gore arang, like all of that kind of stuff, right? And we mean it playful and jokey. We don't consider actually, where we keep saying gore arang oi gori si, maybe subliminally we are telling women they are better looking when they are fairer, lighter, right? And even like the joking of the term of someone being darker skinned than us, we are also setting down this idea that like, oh, you don't want to be too dark, or and over time, whilst we normalize it and it's not our intention for it to be bad or hurt anyone's feelings, doesn't mean it won't. So as we grow and we deal with different communities and we understand the implications of colorism, we can then be like, oh, actually, growing up, when I used to make jokes about A, B, and C, that actually wasn't really cool and that's really hurtful. And perhaps we come to have this wisdom because we end up being a victim of colorist behaviors, right? Or somehow, some way, our ass gets kicked for making an inappropriate joke and we're like, sure, that actually wasn't cool. So again, there's elements of suffering. It's not bad inherently. It can actually teach you a lot about yourself, the good, the bad, all of it, but it comes together, right? Now, following on from that is dharma and suffering. So, when we do Vedic astrology, there are 4 life aims. Dharma is this idea of fulfilling your responsibilities. So when we generate your charts, there's a certain percentage in the 4 life aims that will be heavier for you. That's where we'll shift all your focus. So people who tend to be dharmic heavy often end up being like politician. They'll be like huge ethical business owners who will build up their communities. They can be they might even be entertainers whose art is a representation or like reclaiming culture, but it's this idea that they will step up to the plate and serve. And these are people that whether they like it or not is a different story, but their life will be designed in such a way where they're constantly kind of put into positions where you have to caretake, right? You have to lead, you can't abandon your responsibilities. So when we talk about the fulfillment of dharma, suffering is a part of fulfilling our dharma, right? It's paying your dues, it's facing your challenges, it's stepping up to the occasion. So to resent suffering is a sign of a weak soul. Something has gone wrong, we are not evolving. But the person who stands up handles their suffering, doesn't allow it to kind of collapse their being or even send them on a trajectory of doing stuff that is not of service to you and harmful for you. You see how it all comes alive? And again, it's quite similar to the Sikhs in that regard. Something about suffering leads to moksha, liberation. Because, suffering will keep you if you don't know how to handle suffering, and it's not about understanding the purpose, but really just handling business before business handles you, basically, you will just stay in a cycle of stupidity and emotional turbulence. And it, like, to me, it's like spiritual sickness. So I'm like, instead of like allowing yourself to go through that washing machine of sadness, of rage, of wrath, of like all these awful things, stand up, right? Figure it out, and eventually you will. And only when you do that, you can be liberated, because otherwise it will always just drag you back in. And to some extent, we will be complicit in how we get dragged back in. And alongside Dharma, I think it's an idea of testing people. So I say it a lot when I read people's charts, right? Because people are always fascinated. Well, like, how do I change star signs? Like, what is going on? Because we know certain experiences are going to happen to you. If you go through those experiences in a way that like is above board, we know your persona will change and then you will become this thing. However, if you go through that experience and you don't metamorphosize and you stay in whatever mindset pattern that got you into that experience, we know you won't evolve. So we think you stay in the chart that represents the immature soul. You have those distinctions in Vedic astrology for a reason. And the fact that everyone's charts are set up that by default, it shows we know you are all destined to go through suffering. That's the whole point. That's why we have those distinctions, that you will change and then these options will come to you. And it's so funny to me when people are like, it says all these good things in my chart, why hasn't it happened? Because then I have to sit there for like 10 or 15 minutes and comically and gently and kind of respectfully, but sometimes it's hard because people deserve to be read to filth, to be like, look, you didn't step up to the plate. You chose to stay in your comfort zone. You chose to do A, B, and C. And whilst this is pleasant, of course, you don't have a bad life. Why should these things come to you? You have not challenged yourself. You haven't took any risks. You haven't done anything that's worthy. So you will stay there and you will feel the benefits of that chart. And this is as good as it gets. But when the opportunities present, if you want to step up to the plate, then we can get here. Evolve. Suffering is a part of catalyst, right? You will grow past certain things. Now, let's talk about samsara and suffering. So samsara, again, is the cycle of birth, death, rebirth, all that jazz. The ultimate goal of like Sanatana Dharma, Hinduism, is to break free of samsara. So at some point, we have to learn to stop being a victim of suffering, and there's something in our mindset that has to shift. So when we get to the point of death, our behaviors have evolved. Sorry, it's late night here, super late. So it's just this idea that, look, if we are gonna be in this cycle, by default we're gonna suffer because we have not worked out a mindset, an approach. We have not evolved to the point that there's no purpose for us to come back, right? So, I mean, that's kind of bittersweet, but whatever. And then, again, when you look at samsara and suffering, it's just a temporary nature of this earth. Like, that is the whole point. To want permanent things in Maya, which is temporary and all illusions, you're just setting yourself up to fail and go through, like, very avoidable suffering too. Which leads me to the final few points when it comes to Hinduism and the purpose of suffering. So one of the other views is all of the life that we experience is a leela, is a divine play. Hang tight to the people who follow me on Patreon, because I've been saying this for ages. Like, I've just come to a point where everything to me is a leela. Like, this is all theatrics. So the reason they say this is not to make a mockery out of pain, but you could look at it through two lenses. If you wanted to go super classical and traditional, obviously we believe in different devatas, right? Different deities. Whatever is happening is not really about us. It's the deities doing out their divine play, right? We are just a part, I don't know if you want to say entertainment, but this is not us. Everything going on is the deities that own plans and actions, and we are simply just a part of the play, right? And alongside that, I want to give you an example. So, you know, in Hinduism, there's not really an idea of like God and Shaitan and a devil, right? No. There are many reflections of not so nice people and nicer people praying to the same God, right? They're both praying to a deity for a boon, for a leg up, like, please help, answer me. Both of these individuals at some point get answered. So I think when you talk about divine play and Leela, I think it just goes by default. Everything we experience are not wildly different. They are just different sides of the same coin. And I think that brings some resolve to people. Now, the other aspect of Leela is, again, it's talking about the illusionary nature of this reincarnation. Is our suffering really suffering, or is it self-inflicted? Everything is perception too, right? And also some things are so above and beyond us. So sometimes we mistake our suffering for like an individual attack on us, when really it could be a part. We could literally not even be the plot twist. I always make this joke, especially on my Patreon once again, where I'm like, you are not always the main character. So when you are going through a season and spiritually it feels like a hurricane, do not be arrogant to think it's all about you. You have no idea what you also could be feeding into. And then it's just a case of showing up, and whatever's meant to be will be. You just happen to be there. Sometimes you are just a civilian casualty, even if it sounds crap, but it be like that. Which leads me to the last two things, right? Ultimately, suffering is about self-realization, understanding who you are, why you are here, where you are heading. Suffering helps answer some of those questions. And then the last thing is acceptance. Are you starting to see there's something about suffering that ultimately makes us accept God's will? It makes us accept things about ourselves that we may either ignore or overestimate. And either way, it can lead to better outcomes, but it's the medium in which we get to those better outcomes. And with that, the final religion I wanted to look at was Islam, because I think you guys are going to be pleasantly surprised by how many commonalities there are. So, in Islam, the purpose of suffering is very much similar to what we find in Sikhism and Hinduism, which is it's an integral part of the human experience. And through the experiences of suffering, we are going to improve our patience, we are going to strengthen our faith in God, and most importantly, it will involve aspects of us which we have not been really cultivating, aspects of ourselves that we have been neglecting, all of that kind of jazz. And it can only happen through suffering, right? And for me, if I could break this down, there's a few key elements of Islam that I really think speak to the purpose of suffering. So it actually begins with Iman, a test of faith, right? So again, I have read the Quran, which often shocks people, but your girl likes to learn. So, when you look at the purpose of suffering, often it is a trial of belief. And we see this in multiple hadiths, we see this in multiple aspects of the Quran. And it's talk about when you are tested through these experiences, it gauges the strength of the believer, right? How much do you really trust Allah, that you understand that whatever you are put through is never to spite you, but to enrich you? And there's one Quran reference that really stood out to me, right? So it says, do people think that they will be left alone because they say we believe and we will not be tested? How mind-blowing, right? If you look at it, because Abrahamics are obviously shaped very differently to Dharmic faiths, but again, the whole purpose of this, I want to show you that universally, I think you'd be so surprised how many commonalities there actually are, right? To believe in God does not free you of suffering, but it makes you feel purposeful. It will keep you grounded. And to an extent, we are all children of God. So why, like, we always make the joke, like, who's your favorite child? It doesn't exist. Even when people give you like answers, they play around, it doesn't exist. You love the child in different ways, but equally they all feel your love. So if they all equally feel your love, they've got to all equally feel the nature of your household. And also free will. It's not that, I often think about this, right? When people are like, I do so much prayer and worship, and like I do this, and how could ever, I'm like a good person, or like even in communities, right? When you hear like, can you believe that happened to them? They come from such a household, and they're very religious and da. I'm always like, yeah, at what point was the agreement that if we believed and we practice our faith in such a way that, we would assume only good things could happen to us? Like, nowhere does God state that that's a part of the parcel. And if anything, the more, sometimes I think, and I see this a lot in astrological charts, but like, one thing that always made me cackle with stuff at spirituality is this idea of negative houses and how they scare people to, like, you will have an unfortunate life. And I'm like, I don't actually think that's how it's going to work, big man. My personal experience is when people have such placements where we know there's a higher possibility that you will have more frequent difficulties. Can I tell you something? All these people have always ended up being some of the most wealthiest, most accomplished, most happiest, strongest, wisest, passionate people that I read for. Every time. It's very rare that they don't evolve and grow. They may not start in the happiest of circumstances, but like a lotus blossom, they are the ones who will grow past the most muddiest of waters. And because they have grown and they have somehow learned how to make sure none of these waters can sit on their beautiful petals, they're often admired as some of the most like precious flowers on this earth. Come on now. And then the next element. So when Islam is exploring the purpose of suffering, a lot that comes up is like the idea of purification and forgiving of sins. Again, not that different to what Sikhs and Hindus look at, right? This idea that you are being evolved, you are growing. So there was this one Quran reference that really stood out to me, and there was a Hadith one that I want to cover. So the Quran reference is this: and we will surely test you with something of fear and hunger and a loss of wealth and lives and fruits, but give good tidings to the patient. So think about when we were talking earlier about the idea of gratitude, contentment and acceptance. I cannot emphasize this enough. We are so short-sighted as humans. Think about this. When we suffer and things change and things don't go to our liking, isn't it interesting in how those moments we reconfigure how we're looking at things, the things that we're allowing, enabling, and when we reconfigure, we have to rebuild something, all of that kind of jazz. It's so rare something better doesn't come through that process. So perhaps suffering is also a tool of God getting you to reconfigure things that you wouldn't have addressed, and it's only in your benefit, right? And there is something so much sweeter when we get things that we have to wait a long time for, right? Not in a crass way, but it's kind of like the age-old thing with dating, right? We often tell people, like, make sure you're not too easy or you don't talk too much, and when you withhold yourself, they'll want you more. If it's good for dating, why would it not be good for your soul? And in the Hadith, I thought was really interesting. No calamity befalls a Muslim, but that Allah expiates some of his sins because of it, even though it were the prick it receives from the thorn. So I think, again, it's talking about, look, the nature of receiving grace is not easy. It's never designed to be that way. But enduring hardship with patience, with faith, with a certain element of adaptability, flexibility, like brainstorming, not just, I don't think sitting there mindlessly either. There's something about these moments that are not glamorous, that are funky and bitter in nature. There's a forgiveness that falls upon us, because we also have to acknowledge the attributes of us that get us into sticky situations, and to not acknowledge some of those, I think, is a little bit reckless and not really good for us. Now, this changes in different scenarios, of course, but I'm just saying, perhaps There is some element. And maybe one thing I was thinking, because there are definitely some situations where I'm like, I cannot believe this happened to this person. They seem like so delightful. I can never imagine. But then I'm like, it's not my point to imagine. I just translate what's on paper, and then you have to detach, right? But then one thing I was thinking about is, you know, the people who often are like, I'm so good, I'm so kind, and I'm so this and that. Well, I don't know if this justifies it, but you know when they hurt someone and they can't believe they've done a certain thing, it's in that moment they truly learn about themselves what is not so, you know, cool and okay. And then they feel bad. And even though you've committed a sin, perhaps you committing the sin shows you your true nature, and then you can evolve past it. Just a food for thought. And then I wanted to touch on the concept of, I was going to say sabr, it's not sabr, right? So it talks about developing patience and resilience. So the virtue in patience in Islam is huge. Suffering provides an opportunity for the believer to practice patience, perseverance. Oh my god, you get what I'm trying to say, hopefully. But basically, by enduring hardship with patience, it fundamentally does something to the soul which is only in its benefit. It will build inner strength. It will make you resilient. Again, only good things can come through these experiences. So one of the references in the Quran that I thought was really good for this point is, O you who have believed, seek help through patience and prayer. Indeed, Allah is with the patient. So, you know, when we talk about people confirming, like, is God real in A, B, and C? For me, I've always felt you can see the might of God because there are people in this life that will suffer for unfathomable amounts of time and in the most intense, extreme ways. But some way, somehow, just when you think they should break or they should crumble, they persevere, they flourish. And I'm always like, because I'll tell you something. For me, growing up, I am notoriously impatient, stubborn, horribly competitive, right? These are not my greatest attributes. So when I was younger, the quicker I could do something and achieve something, and it's something I pride myself on, right? Like, hugely. And then life will be lifing, God will give you experiences, and then over time, and it took time because again, I am not in nature very not stubborn. Like, stubborn should really be tattooed somewhere on my body, right? But just with time, I learned nothing good comes quickly. No pun intended, literally no pun intended. Wrong podcast. But it doesn't. Anything, it's kind of a contradiction, but I think there's like some sort of divine balance to the things that are meant for you come with a level of ease, but doesn't necessarily mean they have to arrive that easily either, right? There is just something reassuring in time. I have a whole new respect for time that I didn't have when I was younger, and I often think it's the things that slowly happen, the things that can stand the day-to-day activities, perhaps the things that we don't glamorize, goodness comes to them. You really, and again, I often think about the whole concept of like fame and people who quickly are put into the spotlight. I'm like, nothing good comes from this. They all break. They were not prepared. Perhaps that's it. I think when you talk about patience, we often ignore that God is preparing us. And I personally felt that myself. Like, I often joke about, look, if you guys had found me in earlier life, no, I do not think, one, I don't think I'd be of service to any of you because I hadn't experienced things. But also, I think there's a certain level of my personality now where I'm not so affected by stuff. I think for me at least, if I was young and you had all discovered me, you guys would have had too much control over my emotions. And I would not have been able to have like boundaries or just, yeah, it would have been a hot mess. But now I look at everything, I'm like, this is perfect timing because I don't seek validation from anybody. Again, maybe it doesn't come across, but like I have like a really deep relationship with God, and I'm just, I don't know, there's a certain level of resolve or strength in me that was not existing when I was younger. So I feel like that gives me a lot of grace to handle stuff, and I'm so grateful the way things unfold. So the same thing, but that wasn't the initial feeling. Initially, it just felt like constant failure, constant humiliation, embarrassment, and now I'm like, oh, all those times I thought I was stripping up, it was like strength training from God. And each time I would learn to carry weight, and the weight would increase. So by the time you all meet me, you're like, oh my God, she's so strong and doing that. But it's like, no, I spent years in the spiritual gym training. So what you think is like she's so effortlessly pulls it off, like it's a journey. And then the fourth element is a reminder of the temporary nature of the world. So Islam picks on this too, right? It talks about, to a certain extent, we need detachment from worldly affairs and day-to-day life, right? Don't get so caught up and reactive of it, because obviously for Abrahamic faiths, you believe in an eternal life, an afterlife, right? Whereas for Dharmic faiths, we believe in the washing machine. We go round and round in that bad boy until you come out the way you need to. So Islam often talks about another element of the purpose of suffering is to teach you the temporariness of the world around you. Things change, seasons change, people change. To constantly be attached to what is designed to be temporary would only cause you misery. But if you go a layer deeper, to serve things which are temporary and therefore not that powerful, valuable, this will lead you nowhere. And if it does lead you anywhere, it will not be a path where I promise you will feel happy in the end. How sobering, but also how fitting, right? So then there's a line in the Quran that goes, every soul will taste death, and we will test you with evil and with good as a trial, and to us you will be returned. I'm just saying. And then I think the next thing would be, in Islam, same as you saw in Sikh and Hinduism, it's a mean of drawing you closer to Allah, to God, right? There is something undeniable that, like, when we go through suffering, I do think it is like, I mean, I might be biased because of my personal experiences, but I don't think I would be spiritual at all if it wasn't the different layers of suffering that I have experienced and I have witnessed. Like, it's just, for me, it's undeniable, right? And that's not an objective truth, that's just my truth, right? I think there's just something when you see so many variations of suffering, you understand, like, I don't know, like the mercy of God, the intelligence, the might, like it does, for me, it left me in awe. I don't know about everybody else, but I'll be like, God damn. But there's an hadith reference actually. So it goes, when Allah loves a servant, he tests him. If he endures patiently, he draws him close. And if he does not, he distances him. So, I'll give you an example, right? So you guys are obviously like, she's a great Vedic astrologer, no, right? When I tell you, I by no means am the prototype of what a Vedic astrologer should be, right? So in wider South Asian communities, I should be the following, right? I should definitely sound different. I should probably be very devout religious. I don't know, I feel like I should be all these things that I'm not. Because when you look at a lot of proper Vedic astrologers, not the Starbucks spiritualists cosplaying as us, right? I do not fit the profile. I do not. Even like, none of it. And I think one of my saving graces was, when people ask me like, where do you get all your knowledge? How do you know so much? It's through suffering. Like, it's not through, because I think there's a classical education you get when it comes to Vedic astrology, and that's fine and dandy. But I think the power and the actual gift is a deeply intimate experience, and our gifts will come to us in different ways, but all the knowledge I have comes through suffering. It doesn't come from a textbook. It definitely does not come from like a traditional sense. It comes from very tumultuous experiences, and because I've seen it so vivaciously, I don't know. And even like when people ask me like, where do you get all your knowledge? It's various, but honestly, most of it comes through prayer and worship. And that prayer and worship has been done when I have been in like very tough times. And I just think, and nothing happened quickly. Like nothing for me. I am a late bloomer. I'm a slow burner. Nothing about me is ever, well, I think to me it's never on time. Everything's like very just like, mismatched. No, the one thing I've always had is consistently that I knew whatever happened I deserved, and it was always God's plan. And then that mindset has just, it's landed me here and it gets me the things that I know. Whereas compared to like maybe traditional Vedic astrologers, again, Starbucks spirituality stems from my community, and then outwardly that disease is spread. But one thing that used to be really infuriating for them is like, these would be very like, they would pronounce everything correctly. They'd be so like deeply into like the politics of different aspects of Indian culture, and it'd infuriate them that such an oddball, an outcast, someone who perhaps is very scandalous in nature and provocative, how could she end up holding this knowledge, and how could her gifts be so colourful? And then here's me, who represents God, is the biggest mascot, and that thing is not working for me. And I often think it's because it's like they don't actually... Do you know what I was saying earlier? There's some people who don't believe they should suffer or things should be a certain way. I think you see it in that. So when you talk about, and even my personal experience, kind of like the biggest spiritual practitioners or the people that you were like, oh my God, how freaky, they can do A, B, and Z. A lot of them have gone through really intense experiences. And it's literally, I just think it's like that thing of, there's just something kind of magical that I think when you believe in God, I don't know, somehow, some way he always comes through for you. But it's just, there's no, I don't know, I just never had any expectations. Is that really bad to say? I've never had any expectations of what life should be. Like, I've always just been very like, well, I mean, that's maybe where the nickname Carefree Brown Girl comes from. But I've always just been like, yeah, I'm happy with whatever you give me. Like, I'll make it work. And then as I've got older, I think that's just resolved. And then, yeah, I don't know, God's plans, I suppose, and just kind of work there. But yeah, I think there's something in suffering that will draw you closer to God. And it's up to you. If you want to accept it, if you want to fight it, if you think it's beneath you, that's between you and God. But I definitely don't think there's any losses in it. And I think you'd be surprised about sometimes how suffering can be protection. It can be redirection. It can be many positive things, but it's in your perception. That rhymed, didn't it? And then I think lastly, well, there's two things. So one of the last ones was in Islam, it talks a lot about how the purpose of suffering will grow compassion and empathy in an individual, right? And there's a really good hadith that goes, none of you truly believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. When we suffer, it should hopefully increase your sense of charity, because you understand, like I said earlier with Sikhism, your ship is always still out to sea. It can change any minute. And when you know the vicious nature of a temporary life, you'll want to help however, right? That's same for me. Like, I don't know, there's just something about, I'm not resentful about suffering because I feel like it's only ever enriched me. So one of the things I think I find difficult is like people who throw pity parties or who are like, woe is me, because I'm just like, but then I think for some people, right, when they go through suffering, they allow it to enable their cruelness, and then they just move mad. Whereas for me, I feel like it's only ever opened my heart. And I also think that's why it's always incredibly important to be kind to people, because you just, it's all changeable, and that could easily be you, right? And I think once you know, I often think about the help I would have liked to receive when I was going through things. Damn, it cut out, I have low battery. But yeah, like I was saying, I often think about the help I would have liked to received in those moments that I never got. So I don't know, when I'm in a position, or even if I wasn't in a position, it's nothing to me. I think you should always give back, because yeah, you never know. And then maybe the last thing is something about suffering I think naturally gives us divine wisdom that we would not be able to get elsewhere or any other means. So there's a line in the Quran that goes, and it may be that you dislike a thing while it is good for you, and it may be that you love a thing while it is bad for you. Allah knows while you know not. It's like I was saying earlier, rejection may be protection, right? And I always make this joke. There are many things in this life that I have wanted so badly, and I have often felt so embarrassed, and generally I've had low self-esteem when I have not had these things, because I have felt it's a poor reflection of me and something must be inadequate or wrong with me. And God is the biggest joker. Like, God is the biggest stand-up comedian we will ever meet. It's so comical to me. Give it some time and a wider lens. How often it was so good that I didn't receive those things. How often it was so good that it didn't work out how I wanted. But at the time I was suffering, at the time I was humiliated, at the time I was embarrassed, there was a lot of negativity, you know? But that's God's will. So when you talk about like the suffering and the purpose of it, can you see it clearer now? Do you understand why like suffering is not against you or bad for you or anything of the sort? So always have that perception about you, because I've only looked at 3 religions. There's obviously so many more religions in the world. But I bet you, even if we went through them one by one, you would see the commonalities. Which leads me to the final part of this episode. Let's talk about charts and suffering and what it means when we look at your charts and we know certain things are coming up. Alright, sip on that jar. So look, as a Vedic astrologer, we can see everything in those 20 birth charts, right? Does not mean it makes it any easier to discuss why things have happened to you or what could happen coming up. I think the role for us is, whilst we may be gifted with translating nature and whatever God has written for you, we are not responsible for that text. We do not have complete control of how that thing can unfold for you. The only control we have is essentially to be some sort of cosmic pop-up notification, and that's it, right? Even when it comes to this idea of Vedic remedies, I've always been very, very careful with them, because, put it this way, let's go back to 2 important charts. The D1 chart, which represents, it's your cosmic blueprint. It's the essence of you, right? Every life that you have lived has got us to this point in your journey. So this is what we're working with. But astrologically, it's a lump of clay. It's not the end product of you. Then we have the D9. So a lot of you think that's your marriage chart, right? That's sexism within our religion. The D9 chart is fundamentally the best version that you can become of yourself in this lifetime. Now, the journey from D1 to D9 is a mixture of destiny and how someone uses their free will. There is one chart I am yet to read in the last 15 years of doing astrology where someone gets the really good part without enduring certain levels of pain. Some people start life in very tough circumstances. I cannot tell you how hard it is to do a reading for a stranger and be like, oh yeah, so I know when you were younger A, B and C happened, but don't fret because something about those experiences was going to lead you here. No, you have to handle that so gently, and you can never take away someone's pain, but it's important to get them to understand this is not the only thing that defines you, right? So in that regard, that's a nice way to be like, look, there's a journey of transformation that if you want is written here, but it's going to require you to go through A, B, and C. And if you can make sure you don't allow things to make you act out of character, you don't attach yourself to things that will never bring you peace or really a reflection of all that you could be, cool, we will get to this destination. Then there's the other layer, right? Karmas. So When we look at karmas through Vedic astrology, we're looking at different karmas to what the religion outlines. So, for instance, we believe you carry the karmas of your ancestors. We believe you carry the karmas of your biological parents, which again is always a fun conversation to have with grown adults. Obviously, you carry the karmas of your previous lives, and in the current moment, your actions have a reaction and consequence. So that's where it gets a little bit tricky, right? Because when I was younger, I'd have people sitting in front of me, and I think these people are so delightful, right? Why on earth are they going through A, B, and C? And then the older you get with maturity, experience, and wisdom, it's not that you lack any care or like, I can't believe that's happening to you. That doesn't decrease. But what you understand is fundamentally something had to occur to get them in to this moment of time. So at that point in moment, it's not a case of judging you, degrading you or anything, but it's making you realize this moment is predestined. It has to happen. You're not getting out of it. So now let's problem solve. How do we go through this moment so it feels less like a car crash and more like an insect bite? And then when you just get to a place of acceptance, right? And it doesn't even have to be people. The thing I think I sometimes find difficult is people like, well, I didn't do anything, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's the colonizer's mindset. You think you would be free of consequences. No, like it's, to a certain extent, it's a divine play. It's a leela, right? We don't have to understand it, like I said, but we have to engage it. And not engaging with it doesn't mean you're going to get somewhere. Like there's nothing good that comes from not stepping up to the plate, right? When you step up, even if you feel like you're not handling it properly or it's not going as great as you want, I'm promising in the background is working in your favor. And I often think that's it. When we look at suffering, we get so caught up in the present that we fail to understand something is forming in the future due to this, right? Something in the past is now being put to bed. But suffering is that medium in all which everything is resolved. And on a final note, I was thinking about this because obviously relationships, romance tends to be like quite a hot topic, right? The one thing I want to say is, so you have to remember, for us, we believe in 4 areas of man. We're currently in Kali Yuga. A part of Kali Yuga is things are much more dysfunctional. Things are more likely to malfunction. And it's not that they didn't before, but they become more frequent. And they become more frequent due to the nature and the cultures and the way we function. It's not by divine design. It's because our behaviors and our resolve have changed in such a way that they are no longer able to deal with things as well as they should do. But there's a chance to improve and always the task will still be completed, but it just takes longer. So going back to romance and stuff like that. Look, many people often come to me saying, this is my type, this is what I want, I pull this time and energy, like all the rhetoric you can imagine. I can see it in the moment, they can't, but that's fine because we all have our own blind spots, that what they are chasing is not in their benefit. And ultimately, it will only ever keep letting them down and they are wasting their energy. But sometimes we have to learn the hard way. There's something about suffering that can take the most stubborn of mindset, the most lowest of self-esteems, and metamorphosize them into someone that can receive blessings way bigger than their mindset could ever have imagined or comprehended for themselves. So yeah, when we look at your charts, we see the good, the bad, the ugly, the downright, like not fair, not right. But the different side for us is we see it as a medium, which is not just necessary for your growth, but can contribute to stuff way beyond the vision of the current moment. So yeah, when you look at the purpose of suffering, don't get so wrapped up in, oh my God, like this is a moment, we're never bouncing back. No, it's the nature of life. You cannot resent the nature of something. Think of it. It's like inviting a tiger into your home. Doesn't matter how long the tiger's been domesticated, it's in the tiger's nature to get hungry, to create a madness. Deal with the nature of the beast. Do not project on the beast what you want it to be. You will have better outcomes when you understand the nature of the beast and dealing with it in that way, versus I've watched a bunch of Disney films and why is my companion not talking to me, right? Anyway, that's enough. I am all talked out. I hope that was helpful. I'll see you on the next episode of Cosmic Jar. Bye, hibiscuses!